I heard from so many dear friends, and I'm really happy that they are also among here, that is it going to be again a conference where we are telling what's never happened and what never going to happen because there's no political will about it, behind it? Most probably yes. However, I'm still super grateful to be here, especially because this is my first term as an MEP, and this is the first time we can have the Romani Week in this term in person. And I'm super grateful that finally I can welcome a group of people from Hungary that I always wanted to bring here from Hungary because they are from the field. They are the ones who are fighting for the issues we are just talking around this table. Because I think our job is to build these bridges. Never believe that something is impossible. Impossible if we accept it's impossible. But working on the ground, working grassroots, and looking for how to build up those bridges to the decision makers who are, for instance, sitting around this table, to giving the voice and pushing for political will. That's going to lead us for a solution. We talked in the past 3 years, of course, longer, but since I'm here, many, many times about how the Roma integration strategy failed, literally failed. We tried our best to have a stronger, legally binding strategy to be accepted this time. And we concurred in many levels. However, it's still not what we wanted to see, but it doesn't mean that we have to stop here. Of course, we can start a long list how much money was embezzled, how much money was taken on behalf of the Roma communities all over Europe and never reached the people who are in need. Of course, sometimes we say that talking is not enough. I think the more we talk, the louder we talk, and the more we act against, that can lead us for solutions. Latest, I was in Nyíregyháza, in Hungary, where I think everybody has to hear about the story when millions of European funds we're supposed to use for desegregating Roma settlements was actually used to deepen the segregation and to actually create educational segregation, school segregation in that regards, because before there were 2 Roma settlements, and one was quite close to a school which was an integrated school. Now that the 2 settlements were mixed up and actually made people's living condition worse than before, now even there's 1 school possible for them. This is why the European Union supports Roma communities with more and more budget of each year to actually let local decision makers stealing this money from them. I don't believe so, but I think our job is to never let these issues just to happen, just because we think that it's a member state competence, and if the local authorities doesn't do anything about it, we can't do anything about it. It's not true. I'm really pissed off every time when I'm here from the Commission that we are monitoring the issues. I think monitoring is a diplomatic word of we are aware, but we won't do anything. Our job is to never accept this answer. And our job is to push the decision makers at a European level to find new channels. Who said that just because before it never existed, it cannot happen? We have to fight for direct finances. We have to fight for the end beneficiaries' protection. We have to fight for direct funds, for civil society, for local communities. And we have to realize that it's not about the millions of euros. Many times, micro donations, perfectly targeted to where it's needed, is more helpful. I'm not kidding. I know the Hungarian reality more than other member states. But in Hungary, sometimes 1, 2, 5,000 euro makes a huge difference. People doesn't need millions. People need to finance on the spot where it's actually the most helpful. And we have to listen for those who knows where those money can be spent the most beneficial. So this is why we are here. And for everybody who are a little bit already upset about it, again, we're gonna just talk. I think it's really important, and I know that among here us, there's a lot of people from the ground who can share their stories, and our job is to make their voice even louder. First, let's start building these bridges, because together we are stronger in order to push for effective solutions on a Commission or on a Council side. And I think until you can see Roma friends and many people in this Parliament, you can trust that there is no impossible to reach for a legally binding Roma strategy, and for to find the channels where actually these European funds find the end beneficiaries, find the people who are most in need. And of course, complete equality doesn't exist, but the world we are living in, it's not the world that we imagine that in a 21st century European Union going to look like. And meanwhile we are just talking, or meanwhile we are thinking that what is impossible was not. We're losing generations. Never forget, at the end of the day, we are talking about actual lives, actual futures, and we are here to protect those futures and help them for making the next steps. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Donat. Indeed, this is another meeting in which we are going to discuss, but it's actually very important what we are going to discuss about, and you have touched upon a very important aspect, that the money for the inclusion of the Romani people must actually reach the local level, because that's mostly where they live, and that's where we find the need and the problem to be solved. Thank you very much one more time. And thank you for being a co-host of this event and of the Romani Week 2022. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is again the time for you to listen to the one who made this Romani Week possible, Mr. Romeo Franz, member of the European Parliament from Germany, the first Sinto from Germany who got elected in the European Parliament. Again, please, a round of applause to welcome him at this event.
Thank you, Marius. Derven Bartale, Romale, Lacho Divis, Mirikam Lesinte, Shuka Kayante Meakai. Kovagurko, si Booty. Umikamava, kanonte penapko le lava, di parkiraf mange, Pashmiro Pral, Marius, kokadasi bari buti, kui chachopa I bari buti. Und dann kam auf der Parkewafman, Pashmiro Wabat, Pashmotim, Jun si kek Romani chabe, aber Jun si miri prala, Peña, Nina. Me paragraaf mangi, Pashmiro Pral Jochen, Poleski Butin, and I will thank my sister Stella for her work, my brother Adam for his support and work, and by Shimano. He was a trainee in my office, and he comes directly when I called him that I need him. Thank you very much, Shimano. Inhuman living conditions, segregation and discrimination are the set reality for the large majority of Romani people in Europe. Anti-Gypsyism, racist stereotypes, social exclusion, and poverty build a vicious circle from which is difficult to escape. It is one of Europe's biggest challenges to eventually overcome this situation. The EU has the obligation to guarantee Romani people their equality rights, to protect them from racist discrimination and stigmatization, to ensure effective and binding measures to step out of poverty and to guarantee equal access to education, employment, housing, and health. The new Roma strategic framework lays out a strategy and specific goals to end discrimination and reduce of the gap between Romani people and the rest of European citizens. This framework aims to encourage member states to invest more financial resources into achieving these goals. The new generation of EU investment programs, most importantly the EU structural funds, offer the adequate funding for fostering equality, inclusion, and participation of Romani people. To put it simple, it is right now a matter of political willingness of the member states to actually design ambitious national Roma inclusion strategies and ensure their adequate funding. From my past work as civil rights activist and director of the Hildegard Lagren Foundation for Education, Inclusion and Participation of Sinti and Roma people in Germany, I am conscious of the crucial role that self-organizations and activists play in achieving real change on the ground. I want to take this opportunity to thank all organizations and individuals who contribute every day to improving the situation of our people despite sometimes very difficult circumstances. Your work gives me hope that we can actually realize equal rights for Romani people in Europe. Despite several initiatives in the European Parliament to facilitate funding programs for local and regional beneficiaries and the important work of European networks and foundations like Ergo or the Open Society Foundation, many Romani NGOs are still not a level of organizational development in order to directly benefit from EU funding. It must be our common interest to change this and increase our support for grassroots self-organizations. This is also important to put paternalistic approaches towards Romani communities to an end. We developed in cooperation with Isabella a guide. Maybe Isabella, where is he? You can cite, yeah? A guide on EU funds for Roma equality and inclusion 2021 and to 2027. That is supposed to provide more orientation for our organizations in the jungle of EU programs and initiatives. I'm convinced we need more of our organizations involved in the funding programs. This is, of course, a larger undertaking than just publishing a guide, but it is a first step. I'm glad that Isabella will present this guide in the second panel of this event. It is also available in print here in the room and online. And I will thank, and that shows me, or that shows us how important are alliances that my colleague, my dear friend Anna Donat is here from Hungary, and that we work really trustful together. And I will tell you this from the bottom of my heart as a Romani man. She knows our need from her bottom of her heart. And that is very great for me. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you very much to you too, Mr. Franz. It was in 2020, the first time in the history of the European Parliament, when a member of this House had the courage to go in the plenum with a report to ask for a European Romani law. Mrs. Donat was then a huge help and support because we worked really hard together, and not only Mrs. Donat, but also other MEPs from other political groups. But this is a sign that things can change when you have in the right place the right people, like Mr. Franz or like Mrs. Donat, people that never forgot from where they come from. Mr. Franz is a Sinto. He lived his whole life at the grassroots. I am a Roma from Romania. I was born and lived in a Romani community, and Mrs. Donat, she visited and she knows so many Romani communities in Hungary and not only. So, when you have the right people in the right place, a law, it is possible. And I'm happy to see here Mr. Franz, Mr. Schmidt from the European Commission, with whom we work really, really well. And I'm gonna pose him a challenge to take that resolution that is actually asking for a Romani law with Mrs. Dali and with Mr. Dogi, the head of the Roma team, and to make it real, maybe why not this year, when we are going to have approved in this House another report for all the minorities to combat anti-racism and discrimination. We also gave you, through Mr. Franz's report, the legal background, so you have it. Article 19, paragraph number 2 from the treaty will allow us to have a law for the Romani people. It's not because we want it, it's just because this would be a sign of equality to balance the socio-economical situation between non-Roma and Romani people. So I think this will happen quite soon. Thanks again a lot, Mr. Franz, Mrs. Donat. We are going to move on to Mr. Marek Teplansky, Head of Inclusive Growth, Urban and Territorial Development Unit from DG Regio, who is online, if I understand correctly. And our colleagues will put him online. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope my connection is fine and you can hear me in the room.
It's perfect.
Pleasure to be with you today. And again, I would like to appreciate also the opportunity to convey some introductory messages and remarks for today's event on the challenges and opportunities of ensuring adequate and effective regional, national, and local funding for Roma inclusion. I would like to emphasize the important role the cohesion policy funds play for Roma equality, inclusion, and participation, in particular as concerns the European Regional Development Fund, for which we, in Director General for Regional and Urban Policy, we are responsible for. Within the scope of reducing inequalities and ensuring Roma inclusion, the European Regional Development Fund will continue to support infrastructure developments, equipment, and access to mainstream quality services in inclusive education, employment, non-segregated housing, health, and social services. These investments may be also part, not only a dedicated national programs, but also part of the regional or local strategies, including sustainable development strategies or other territorial strategies, even at the lowest possible level, at the level of the community, local-led development, where local and authorities will have opportunity to contribute to the design and the implementation. To respond to the complex needs of Roma communities, a comprehensive approach should be also considered. This is what we are emphasizing a lot in our programming discussions with the member states. One fund obviously cannot deliver on the entire scale of the challenge. So this requires complementary measures supported by other funds, in particular European Social Fund Plus, to support human capital development and enhancing the access to services, but also the national funding, which should be made available complementary to the European funding. As you are aware, cohesion policy is delivered in the shared management, meaning that there are responsibilities which are entitled to the national or local authorities in terms of the delivery and the implementation of the investment programs. As you are aware, we are currently in the programming negotiations with the member states on programs for the 21-27 programming period. We are committed to ensuring in this process that the legal and policy instruments introduced in the 21-27 regulatory framework will provide context which is favorable and which will ensure that measures for Roma inclusion will effectively respond to the identified needs including facilitating the access to to mainstream, non-segregated services, combating and preventing discrimination and segregation. There is an important role to play also for the local and regional authorities in including measures for Roma inclusion in the respective strategies. On our side, we are inviting and encouraging member states and the programming authorities of respective programs to ensure that the use of European funds for Roma inclusion is designed on the basis of the specific needs to the national, regional and local level, as defined as close as possible to the level of communities. As it was mentioned by the previous speakers, we should not also forget indeed that the cohesion policy rationale is to reduce social and territorial inequalities, which cannot be achieved without a particular efforts to reduce the educational and spatial segregation of marginalized people. Therefore, the investments in the access to inclusive and non-segregated high-quality services is the key priority for the programming. It is also clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the gap in access to education for marginalized groups, including the Roma. In order to effectively tackle the educational and spatial segregation, we are emphasizing in the programming discussion that desegregation actions should be prioritized instead of improving the quality in segregated settings. In practical terms, we are expecting investments in building and extending mainstream services in education, housing, employment, healthcare, and social care, with the objective to facilitate access to these services for marginalized groups, including Roma. In order to achieve the impact of funds on the ground, the commitment to include and to follow the principles of desegregation and non-discrimination should be translated also to the selection criteria under the calls for proposals and other documents which are produced by the program authorities or those who will be responsible for the implementation of funding. Here I would like to highlight the importance of your role as organizers and also participants and those actors who are directly concerned by the realities on the ground, that that's important contribution to the design of Roma inclusion measures in the programs, but also at the level of the implementation when there is decisions are to be made on particular measures which are relevant for your specific realities in your region or in your town. Effective delivery is, of course, not a single authority undertaking. It's a joint undertaking which needs to be done, which needs to be supported well across different levels. Only then we can achieve an important and effective impact of the fundings on the ground and improved reality. Therefore, I kindly invite you to be involved and active also in the programming discussions, to the extent where it is still ongoing and relevant in the member states or at the regional level, but also to participate in the implementation of funding through the monitoring committees or other bodies. I would like to assure you that on our side, we are committed in having a positive impact of our funding, of EU funding, towards ensuring the Roma inclusions. And I would like to invite you all to contribute to this objective as well through discussions today, but also and most importantly through your active role and activism on the level of the member states or at your respective regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toplansky. I would like to make only one note on your speech, referring to two people that are in the room. Mr. Dan Dogi, who is the Roma team leader in DG Justice, and Mr. Marian Daragiu. When Mr. Franz worked on the report in 2020, they made a valuable contribution. They said that the funds that are there for the Romani people must be implemented directly by a special body to be built inside of the local municipalities, those with experience from the community, those that are knowing really well the needs of the community. And we took this into the report, and this proposal is there. We have also in the room a lot of mayors. They will be awarded for their great work. I see them tired. Please, let's applaud them so they can be more vivid for the next award. And now, because they are the one who must make the change happen, and now I'm going to the last, but one of the most important persons in this panel, the one who is doing a great job in the civil society at grassroots level, but not before welcoming Mrs. Lucia Duris Nikolshonova, one of the other MEPs who is supporting a lot our work. And now I'm going to Mrs. Gabriela Hrabanova. Thanks a lot for organizing this, for being here. You have the floor.
Thank you, dear Chair Marius, dear honorable members of the European Parliament, distinguished guests and participants. I'm very happy to be here to address you today on this short keynote speech on behalf of the European Roma Grassroots Organization Network. We are, as you already might hear from us actually today, but I will still say it, we are a European umbrella organization. We have about 30 members across the European Union and Western Balkan and Turkey. Our friends and members from the Western Balkans were already greeted together with the mayors. And we, practically what we are doing, so we are representing the Roma and pro-Roma community organizations. We are bringing the voice of Romani people to the Brussels institutions. And we are also working on advancing and protecting and promoting the rights for Roma, but also empowering and creating the capacity of the Roma civil society across Europe, Western Balkan. And we already highlighted on numerous events that were taking place here that we have to make real adequate efforts to ensure that the funding, it's bringing the equality, inclusion and participation at all levels, from the national, regional to the local level. We also talk a lot about the situation that Roma are facing across the Europe. So we know that about 80% of Roma live in poverty and social inclusion. 41% Roma are facing the discrimination on all spheres of life. And the situation with the COVID-19 worsen much more, and that the communities, Roma communities, are being disproportionately hard hit. And you will actually hear a lot from our panelists today. First, you will also hear from many of our members that are bringing the accounts to the European Parliament, that the situation actually, it's not easy for everyone, that we are lacking the adequate funding, and that we have to ensure the proper funding for the measures which are in the national Roma inclusion strategies at the national level. And we also see that with the current refugee crisis, that we are going to face even more challenges, because we have to actually, those funds which are available would have to be even more divided and have to be allocated in order to ensure the fair support for those Roma being in Europe now. So what we want to do today, we want to take a closer look on the situation and the ways in which the future funding programs can be improved through bringing the voice of Roma in bringing these measures. So we believe that's time to mobilize and use our capacities and to learn from the past. And we also have to create the capacities as well, and not only for the advocacy which is needed, that we would actually ensure that the reflection of the design of the strategies would be reflected in the funding, but also in monitoring of those measures and the implementation of those measures, because we have to really keep our governments accountable, and we have to kind of ask on how well the funding is being actually spent on Roma particularly. We also are going to introduce today a report which is produced by the Ergo Network, and this report will be presented in the next panel by Marko Pecák. And I think we will also have a presentation for it, but this is the report. You can also find it here. And we are actually saying in this report that the lack of the bottom-up approach and the lack of involvement of the grassroots Roma, it's the failure. It was the failure of the past programming periods. So we want to look in continuing to work together with the European institutions and the relevant stakeholders, and we want to make sure that the funding it's supporting the rights and inclusion, and that we are changing the reality for Roma at the grassroots level. So I really wish you a fruitful discussion today, and thank you for being here today, for making actually having Ergo Network being part of this wider group of the Roma civil society and institutions, and that we really prepared this event on the equal footing. And I wish you fruitful discussion. I would hand over to Daniel Grebeldinger, who is coming from the Ergo, one of the Ergo members from Romania, Nebo Parodimos, who is taking the floor, and he will moderate the first panel.
Sure. But before going to Mr. Grebeldinger, please allow me to thank you, Gabriela, for the wonderful work that you do, especially also for the Romani Week. You were one of the main partners that supported me a lot. But 30 seconds. I don't know how you will look at me after I'm gonna say and do what I'm gonna say and do. It's not usual for you, but it's something that I have on my heart. I invited in Brussels for the Romani Week my family. And I invited my dad. He is there. You can stand up, please. You're my father. The gentleman over there was raised from begging until the age of 4. And he made me the man I am today. And he gave me an advice, and he told me, don't you ever forget where you come from and why you are in Brussels from. And I've never forget. I'm happy that you are here to see your dream come true. Thanks a lot for raising me how you raised me. If I disappoint you to ever, please forgive me. Please do not be ashamed ever, because I see some faces looking strange to me. Don't you ever be ashamed to praise your parents in public spaces, because you are who you are because of them. And now, Mr. Grebeldinger, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. I will invite the other panelists to join. Zuzana and Marco is here. Lisa.
I'm here.
Okay.
Ready? Yeah. Okay. First of all, I want to thank you to the organizers for making this possible. And in this panel, we will try to discuss a little bit about the funding which is targeting Roma communities at European level. And my colleagues, because we are all working together with Ergo Network, like we can say it's an Ergo panel. In the last 1.5 years, we were working in a project very, very important, like new solution to all problems. exchange of new ways of approaches in the field of Roma integration. We put some posters there. It's funded through Norway grants, a project which is happening in 10 EU countries plus Belgium, and in which we were trying to multiply the good practices in Roma integration around Europe. And I was saying it will be a panel speaking about the funding, and our colleague Pecak will introduce the report which we have done in this project about the bottom-up funding existent in this moment in Europe targeting Roma communities. Zuzana will speak a little bit about the situation in education and the Slovak situation more precisely, and with a focus on desegregation measures. And at the end, Isabella will speak about the report which was already mentioned by Mr. Franz for the future of the funding. Like, we go through all the stages, past, actual, and future, and we will try to have some conclusions about ways to improve the funding for Roma equality and inclusion around Europe. At the end of the presentation, we will have a session for question and answer where everybody from the public will be invited to put questions to my colleagues. And I will invite now Mr. Marco, who will introduce the main findings of our report about funding of bottom-up approach, which is one of the most important things, because the small NGOs from the small communities are the ones which are doing, from my perspective, the big change for the individuals. With very nice policies, with governmental approach, with EU programs, many times those don't reach there where the small NGOs are reaching. And those small funds, the MEP from Hungary was speaking about the 1,000, 5,000, they are very important there at local level. And we made an analysis around the existing funding in Europe to see how those are reaching the local community. Marco, please.
Thank you. And also, first, thank you to Ergo for having me work on the study. And then also, I'm very humbled to be here and present at the European Parliament the findings. There's a lot here in the study, and so I'm going to go through it quickly and give just some talking points, but I highly recommend for people to go online on Ergo's website, look at the report and read it, and also I think there's copies here, so after the event, just grab a copy and read the report and some of the information in more detail. Next slide. So the objective of the study was kind of twofold. One, to evaluate and to analyze the existing bottom-up approaches within European funding, so both at the European kind of level, also international organizations and also NGOs and philanthropies. But then also to look at the existing top-down funding approaches from these institutions as well, to see kind of what the gaps are or what are some of the opportunities for kind of community-led funding opportunities. But then also in overall, the report aims to contribute to raising awareness, both within EU institutions and other institutions, as well as private donors, about the importance of bottom-up approaches in Roma inclusion and empowerment. And then at the same time to reflect on some of the challenges in the past and also some of the ways to move forward in the future. Next slide. The study was conducted from program evaluation and also policy analysis. Won't go into details, want to get straight to the results. And then the main methods of data collection and information collection were reviewing documents, but then also interviews with key stakeholders, both from institutions and then also grassroots organizations. The scope of the study was somewhat limited to public authorities and okay. I guess. Okay. Okay. So I guess I'll keep going until something more urgent happens. So the scope was limited to public authorities and governmental organizations, mainly because of their responsibility towards building inclusive societies. Did do a little bit of analysis also from private foundations as well, but the focus was there. So just a bit about the importance of kind of what a community-led approach and bottom-up approach is to Roma inclusion. We wanted to define this because looking at different definitions of what a community-based or community-led approach is, there's many, right? So how we defined it is that a community-led approach is a measure for Roma inclusion that allows Romani communities to determine the objectives, methods, and processes, as well as the participation in monitoring and implementation that empowers and builds capacities of community members and organizations. One important thing just from the background research, I think, that comes from what's called resource mobilization theory is two things. One, that Roma need to have support and resources to effectively address their exclusion, but then also for collective action around to address exclusion, Roma need to see their group as powerful enough to create social change. So I think these two things are very important in sort of any approach that is moving forward. Next slide. So straight into the results. One for relevance. One of the strengths is that there are donors that have mechanisms in place, one to collect about what's happening in civil society. But I think one of the main weaknesses is that in many areas, donor strategies and action plans and other documents that guide their work are not public or transparent. This makes it difficult for the beneficiaries, for Roma communities, to hold these institutions accountable. Another result in this subject of relevance is that the voices of Romani communities continues to be excluded in the design and implementation process of funding approaches that truly do impact their lives. A lot of the institutions and organizations rely on what's called consultation meetings, but with little representation from grassroots organizations, and also a little bit, not as much representation from individuals or organizations that are truly connected to the community. Another, I guess, downfall in this area of relevance is that the objective of mainstreaming Roma inclusion sometimes has overshadowed the need to have direct and purposeful funding to address the deep-rooted social dysfunctions that cause Roma exclusion and anti-Gypsyism. So mainstreaming typically only works in an environment and in systems where individuals and the collective, and in the collective where biases don't exist, right? So we can't mainstream when there's biases, one, from individuals who work in these institutions, and two, that there's actual biases that is structural within these institutions. And this study has shown that in all stages of mainstream efforts, the process and the people create opportunities for Roma to be systematically excluded. Next slide. So efficiency. Sad to say, there are not any strengths that we saw in this study. One, there's very weak processes to ability to track, monitor where the funding goes. So when interviewing donors and other stakeholders, it was clear that there's an issue in terms of monitoring of funding. And also with a lot of the donors and institutions not making many reforms to address these issues. And a lot of this comes from a complicated structure between relationships between donors and beneficiaries, especially state beneficiaries, where there creates a gap in the ability to effectively track and manage funding. So in kind of layman's terms, this just means that in bureaucratic systems, it's quite, the relationships between the two entities, between, like, say, the EU and the managing authorities, is quite difficult to be able to truly have effective monitoring, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility. And then also there are gatekeepers in terms of funding and grassroots organizations, and a lot of these gatekeepers come from the flow of the funding from the institution that provides the funding, but then that actually gets to the community themselves. A lot of this can be municipalities, NGOs, and so on. And this kind of gatekeeping really limits the efficiency of the use of funds. Next slide. I think this is one of the most important aspects of the study, is that the study identified the lack of political will at the national and local level. And this seemed to be the largest barrier to achieving results. Roma communities have been ignored in national governments due to either biases or even electoral pressure, and so on. So I'm going to move quickly because I'm running out of time. Okay, next slide. Sustainability. This is also one of the weaker areas of the study. The need to build capacities of Roma civil society and community-based organizations was unquestioned by donors and other stakeholders. However, the emphasis was on soft capacity, so trainings about like how to fill out an application and so on, but not truly capacities that can support an organization to do the quality work that they need to do. And this wasn't necessarily a priority across all the different donors that were interviewed. Next slide. In terms of equity, there really is a cycle of exclusion. The national governments, really, there was a reliance on managing and funding applications that were, where there was a process and system in place that did exclude Roma from one, knowing where the calls are, for being qualified to provide for these calls, or even having the capacities to do the projects where a lot of these calls asked for. Okay, next slide, and go on to the recommendations. So the general recommendations is that one, all the kind of strategic and planning documents need to be public. The programs and instruments need to be predefined, and with the dedication to building the organizational capacity of organizations on the ground. And I think this is one of the main kind of things that really need to be pushed through, is that funding approaches need to realize that local governments are weak and that there's high risk of prejudice and also corruption. And to address this, there needs to be a movement away from providing a lot of funding to local municipalities, increase the direct funding to community organizations, but also if there is funding towards local municipalities, they need to really vet them in areas of corruption, capacity, and the relationship with the Roma communities for those efforts to really have success. Okay, next slide. At the EU level, I'm going to skip a couple of these recommendations only because you can read them, but I'm going to go towards some of the more important. And in the interviews that I really saw, I think this is the most important, is that the thematic guides for European Commission desk officers and managing authorities needs to have specific information on how to promote Roma inclusion. In the interviews that I did, a lot of desk officers and managing authorities simply did not know how to implement, or even the existence of the community-led local development initiative in the EC. And so, and then also when asking questions about how do they promote this, or how do they ensure that, that the topic is addressed within managing authorities at the national level, it was quite clear that there needs to be a little bit more direction and clear direction to these desk officers. And then also monitoring committees need to be a bit more independent and transparent and have clear representation from Roma communities. Okay, next slide. National governments. So there really needs to be either a yearly or preferably a multi-year defined budget at the national level with implementation plans, with instruments, with indicators, with monitoring systems. The monitoring committees need to be a little bit more active and not just meet in the required 2 times per year, but then also, like I mentioned, to have representation from Roma civil society in the communities. Member states need to increase in transparency in the evaluation of project proposals. Next slide. Oh, sorry, same slide. Back. State development agencies. I think here the most important recommendation is that a lot of the state development agencies followed the agenda of the European Commission, and while they have an opportunity to build their own agenda based on their own values within their organization. And this is really the main recommendation, is that their efforts should support EU efforts, but not necessarily mirror them. Okay, next slide. And then intergovernment organizations is also value-based and somewhat similar, that they should also build initiatives that are complementary to the EU initiatives and not necessarily mirroring them. And then for private foundations, there really needs to be an increase in transparency in their funding approaches and the strategies for Roma inclusion. And then also private foundations, of course, have the ability to be creative in the field and really kind of push through and test out different community-led and participatory approaches to Roma inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Precak. I will give the floor now to Zuzana, who will be presenting together with her colleague Marek Hojsik from the Central European University, who's online with us. But Zuzana, you can start and then Marek can join.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by noting that my contribution will relate to the Slovak experience. And also, I would like to know that these data that I will speak about come from reports of Roma Civil Monitor 2017, 18, and 19, prepared of Slovak NGOs and from national project evaluations. Our organization was also part of this Roma Civil Monitor in previous years. So the efficient use of the European structural and investment funds remains a big challenge for Slovakia. Despite positive intention to use the structural funds to spread good practice examples, the design of the operational program Human Resources, which allocated almost 400 million euro for Roma inclusion in 2014-2020 has proved problematic. In 2014 or in previous programming period, Slovakia has again followed the territorial approach in the use of the funds and targeted its intervention on the localities identified in the Atlas of Roma Communities. Simply, the Atlas of Roma Communities is a mapping of living conditions in marginalized Roma communities. The Department for the Inclusion of Marginalized Roma Communities at the Ministry of the Interior was the intermediary body responsible for the largest part of these funds. And the Human Resources Operational Program assumed to use of resources from the European Social Fund and European Regional Development Fund. And they assumed to use it through priority axis. One priority axis was integration of marginalized Roma communities and was designed to support soft project. We called it soft projects. And it means project like social work or community centers, like work in the community centers, or preschool activities, or some health education assistant. And the other priority, or the other priority X, was a technical assistant, and this was related with the hard infrastructure project, like construction of kindergartens or community centers or drinking water supply, etc. So, and So we found out that due to the limited human, professional, and administrative capacities of smaller municipalities with Roma communities, the creators of the operational program planned to target soft investment in 150 towns or municipalities with the really poorest Roma communities, which were in this Atlas of Roma Communities. And they wanted to, or they prepared packages of projects to be implemented in the same time, like social work together with land regularization or with the work of assistant in the kindergarten. So it should be one package for these 150 localities. But the first call for this takeaway package was issued in 2017. So 2 years, there was a 2 years delay. Then there were also possibilities for other Roma communities which were also in this in this Atlas of Roma communities, but were not included in these 150 localities, and they could ask, pardon. They could ask or call or to join to other projects that were managed by the implementing agency of the Ministry of Labor. Through these projects, they have started in 2015 and end 2019. So it means that municipalities with the most marginalized and poor Roma they received support later and for shorter period. Very alarming is a fact that a national project aimed at legalizing land and has been extremely terminated, which is really unacceptable in the context of solving the poor housing and living situation of Roma. This is because, this situation when the Roma are not living in a legalized house, it leads to the situation when they cannot ask for some social benefits, like for example, to get benefits for housing. And also, the most problematic is that infrastructure such as roads, payments, water, electricity, or gas connections cannot be also built in illegal locations. So when we speak about how to improve life, we have to really do everything for that. That from the beginning there are set the basic conditions to start to change the life conditions of Roma. And the quality of housing is closely linked to the area of health. For example, one research from Slovakia says that there is about 5% of the total population of excluded Roma communities that have more than 60 years. So it means that Roma are in these localities dying younger than the majority. I would come, maybe I would make a shorter my speech because also Marek will join to my presentation. The monitoring and evaluation of the project is also very problematic. Shortcomings in the selection and definition of some of the program's measures, indicators from the previous programming period persisted in also in this new or 2014-2020 programming period. And these weaknesses have meant that the measure indicators do not always catch the real progress achieved in the individual areas of monitoring. This means that not all progress can be measured quantitative with quantity, but we need also to measure by quality assessment. We need to use integrated assessment approach where we can use both of these methods to find out really how is the situation or which progress was done in this situation. And in the end, I would like to add that European structural and investment funds are the main and in some cases the only sources for funding essential Roma inclusion projects. Delays in the absorption of these funds resources does have a particularly negative impact on Roma, and ensuring the continuity of projects between programming periods is also very problematic, and it often happens that people who were employed in projects lose their jobs, people who have youth services have nowhere to turn, change get stuck, and it is very difficult to follow up where it leaves off. So often projects start with new people, and everything is built from the beginning, which is not effective and does not help to achieve the required impact. We therefore stress that these projects are to be financed from the state budget and to be included among the systematic measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. I will give very shortly the floor to Mr. Marek.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can be very short. I would like to focus on one specific thing within the EU funds implementation, and this is the question of segregation, which is quite problematic both in Slovakia that Zuzana focused on, but also in other countries, and I'm going to speak very shortly about Slovakia and Czechia. We can go to the next slide. So let me start with this very short syllogism. Back in 2015, the European Ombudsman said that the European Commission must ensure that the cohesion policy is aligned with fundamental rights, and she said that this can be done through regulation and monitoring. Secondly, the EU Charter says that people have a right to be protected from discrimination, and the case law says that segregation is a form of illegal discrimination. So by this, we can conclude that the European Commission has a positive obligation to ensure that the EU funds are not used for segregation. On the contrary, that it should actively contribute to desegregation. We can go to the next slide. This is why the European Commission issued a guidance note for member states. Next slide, please. Which basically says that Roma inclusion is not possible without desegregation, because you can, through investments, you can improve living condition in a segregated setting, but you won't ensure inclusion. And whenever the EU funds are used, it should be primary for desegregation. It means actively removing the existing segregation. And if this is not possible, and it's very important that it has to be objectively impossible, then investments can go also into segregated setting to improve living conditions there. So, for example, if you have a segregated Romani settlements and you want to build water, it's eligible, but it must be part of wider desegregation and integration approach. But on the contrary, for example, construction of new segregated housing in segregated Romani settlement is not possible because it's going to strengthen the segregation for the future. We can go to the next slide. So I would like to share with you how those rules were implemented in Slovakia and then in Czechia. So next slide, please. Already the first call, which was to support social housing for Roma, said that the new housing can be segregated. And the managing authority said that an objective barrier for construction of non-segregated housing can be also disagreement of the local non-Roma population. So this is definitely not what the guidance note for member states meant by objective reasons. And it was explicitly said that municipalities can build new housing in remote areas. After a few weeks, the managing authority changed the rules because it was obviously against the guidance. So we can go to the next slide. Later, at the end of the programming period, Slovakia, as probably many other countries, had huge problems in spending available money for Roma inclusion. So I would a little bit discuss about arguments about lack of money. There is a lot of money, but unfortunately the member states are not able to spend that money. And the Commission, to support the absorption of the EU funds, hired the World Bank to assist small municipalities in Slovakia to use money. And unfortunately for many municipalities which have strong bias, to really engage into initiatives that will have inclusive impact, agreed to spend money for social housing, but only in segregated and remote areas. So they ignored the Commission's rules on the segregation. And unfortunately, that was also supported by the World Bank. So I took this one example of a village of Chichava, where approximately half of inhabitants are Roma, and they live in segregated settlements. You can see it on the slide. Those are the two pink areas, and those are the areas where the municipality wanted to use the EU money for building the new social housing. We can go to the next slide. The main argument of the municipality, supported by the World Bank, was that that was the only available construction plots. So what we did, we had a look into the cadastre of land, and we saw that this is not true because there are other construction plots available in the village, and that was just a question of political preference, whether to build the social housing for Roma in the village. What you can see on the right. Right picture, but that was probably politically pragmatic or something. So instead, they preferred to build it on the edge of the Roma settlement, so even more segregated than before. So we can go to the next slide. What was much more positive experience in Czechia, the Ministry of Regional Development wanted to implement the guidance. In my opinion, it was mainly because they were afraid of audits. So it was a pragmatic motivation, but I mean, I wouldn't criticize this. I mean, it is good that it was applied. And in the previous programming period, they implemented this guidance through two things. Firstly, the calls included a list of all socially excluded localities in the country, and it was clearly said new housing cannot be built there. Plus, there were other things that needed to be done, like a description of non-segregation in the feasibility study, etc. And also, the managing authority tried to prevent the concentration. So they said that in one house there can be a maximum of 8 social apartments. Social apartments can constitute only a maximum of 20% of all apartments in the building, not to construct new pockets of poverty where, for example, in one house you would have only poor people living there, etc. And what is to be done now in the new programming period, and we can go to the next slide. They have mapped the whole territory.
If we can conclude, Marek.
Okay, so I can conclude. So maybe let's go to the last slide because this is the most important. I wanted to present also something about the desegregation in education, which is very challenging, in particular in rural setting. But let's go to the last slide, please. Next one. Next one, and this is important. So By my presentation, I wanted to demonstrate that the desegregation rules were not fully implemented. But now what is happening in the post-2020 period? So the European Roma Strategic Framework gives a strong focus on the problem of segregation, and indeed it asks member states to prevent and fight segregation. Plus, the cohesion policy includes this very important enabling conditionality, which includes the indicator concerning existence of measure to prevent and eliminate segregation by member states if they want to draw the EU funds. But what is very surprising, the European Commission this time did not issue any guidance to the member states on to how to use the EU funds to tackle the segregation. So previously it was there, even if it wasn't a high priority explicitly. Now it's a high priority in all policy documents, but there is no regulation that would bind member states to really use the EU funds in a way that won't support the segregation. And there is one internal document within the Commission, but unfortunately this is not publicly available. And for me, a big question is whether this is not a big step for backward, or it is, but the question is whether it's in line with the concept of progressive realization of human rights, which says that if you already have a specific step towards respect of human rights, in this case the segregation, whether you can make this step back. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek. And because we are quite over the program, Isabella, please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Daniel. We're in luck because I prepared a very short presentation. I don't have a research to present, but just a guide that was already referred to. I would also like to apologize to all honorable speakers for this delay. So the guide that I'm going to very shortly present is the guide that Romeo Franz has already mentioned, that you can also pick up from the from inside the room. Sorry, I hope I can continue. Yes, perfect. So as you can see, this guide has been prepared by the European Parliament. It was commissioned by Romeo Franz. And so I had the honor to work with his office, and particularly Jochen, who is over there. So thank you very much for your collaboration and support. And so if we can go already to the first slide. And so this guide, it's definitely going to, it is the guide that is adopted by the Green Group in the European Parliament. Sorry, I'm just a bit stressed with the time. And it has the logistical support also of the CAD organization in Romania. Anyhow, so the aim of the guide is basically to provide this structure overview of the most important funding that exists at the EU level within the new programming period 2021-2027. And to provide this guidance to civil society organizations, but also to individuals. It focuses on how programs could actually work in an efficient way to support Roma equality and inclusion, with a key focus on priority areas within education, employment, health, and housing. It also provides some very concrete examples of already implemented projects for Roma by civil society organizations and local authorities, just as a source of inspiration for further projects that could be elaborated by civil society organizations. It also offered important tips on how to implement EU funds at national level, including who are the main actors and the processes that are involved in implementing the 2021-27 programming period. It provides also a step-by-step information on how to develop successful projects for Roma equality and inclusion. And also it describes a few member states, among which Bulgaria, France, Hungary, Germany, Italy, Romania, and Slovakia. What is the funding that is available at national level in these countries, a brief assessment of the funding situation and opportunities on Roma inclusion at national level, with several project examples in priority project areas. We can move on to the next slide. Here already you can see, but of course if you already picked up the copy, you can see what basically the guides provides for. But I'm not going to, again, stay here and speak too much about it. I'm going to go already to one of the main key aspects that the guide provides for, which is really focusing on the programming period, on particular funds that the guide describes that might be very, very relevant when it comes to funding Roma equality and inclusion. So we focus particularly on European Social Fund Plus, on European Regional Development Fund, on European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, on Just Transition Fund, Erasmus+, the Justice Program, the Citizens Equality, Rights and Values Program, or SERVE as we know it already, the EU4 Health, Horizon Europe, Creative Europe, Digital Europe Program, InvestEU, Recovery and Resilience Facility, European Solidarity Corps. And if I may just say one sentence about this, it's the fact that, and the previous speakers already alluded to the fact that normally when we speak about funding programs for Roma, we look in general to the SIF, the social investment funds, particularly ESF+, ERDF, and sometimes rural development, which also have enabling conditions on Roma. So this time around, what we wanted to do is to look at all the available mainstream funding and see how these funding programs could also very successfully fund Roma-related projects. If we can move on to the next slide, this is an example of how the funds are being described within the guide. So for example, within the European Social Fund, what we try to do is to briefly explain what the fund is about, the budget implementation. Certain funds are managed sharedly with the member states by the European Commission. Certain funds are managed directly by the European Commission, like the SERVE. And so we try to obviously describe how they are managed. Also, what do they do? What actions they support, like in this case of the ESF, supports actions in the area of employment, education, training, social inclusion, including young people affected by the COVID-19 this time around, the type of projects that could be supported, who can apply, what is good to know. And so here in this section, we try to put specifically what would be good to know in relation to Roma inclusion or to Roma-specific projects. So for instance, here, the fact that European Social Fund has this investment priority on Roma, but also the enabling condition, something that the Roma NGOs might want to know. And of course, this is followed by a concrete project example as a source of inspiration. We can go to the next slide. So here, this is the twofold approach that the guide tries to provide. On the other hand, we are looking at all the funds, mainstream funds, and then trying to see how they can support Roma equality and inclusion. On the other hand, what we try to do is to make it even more specific, to look at the thematic priorities within the areas of education, employment, healthcare, poverty and social inclusion, culture and media, equality and discrimination, and then see for these thematic areas which funds could actually work for Roma equality and inclusion. And so we take each of the thematic areas and we try to explain all the funding programs and then the type of specific actions that could be supported under education, employment, healthcare, so on and so forth. We can go to almost the last slide, so very quickly. And so you can see that the guide also tries to provide a quick guide, a step-by-step guide of how we can actually create a project that is funded by the EU. So starting actually with the project idea, how to search for funding opportunities, how to find partners, how to submit a proposal, and tips in project development. Obviously, we didn't invent the wheel. These are all information that the Commission already provides. We just try to put the information together and make it in a manner that is more accessible to civil society. And the last slide basically is just to say thank you very much, but also to provide you with this important information that the guide also provides here, because now we are in this age, this square. exactly, the QR code that you can scan and you can go directly to the link, online link, and you can download actually the guide. I also understand from Johan that the guide now it's or will be very soon very much accessible and visible on the page of Romeo France for you to go there and download. Thank you very much, and hopefully, we will wait for feedback from you. Hopefully, it will be a useful tool for you to be able to use, and I'm here if there are more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella, and other colleagues. Now I will open a short session for conclusion, but not before for questions, but not before underlining some very important aspects which the work which we have done together with Romeo France and Ergo, it's bringing up, like the need of specific and direct funding for Roma, the need of involving the Roma in all the stages of this funding cycle, from the planning to the implementation, and the need of work together to develop the funding schemes and the programs where the Roma community can have a say and list their needs. There are things which are very important if we want to increase the effectivity of the EU funds, and not just EU, also non-EU funds in the future. If there are questions, and I will dare you to come with questions connected with ways to improve funding for Roma equality, inclusion, and participation for our speakers. Okay. Please. Can you push the button?
Okay, thank you. Just shortly, my name is Béla Rácz and I'm from Hungary. I'm representing here One Hungary Initiatives, which is a Roma platform, national platform, and we try to do advocacy in the Hungarian political situation, as you know. So my question would be regarding to these guidelines. So I think we see many guidelines, and they are, which were presented, I think they are all good and they are all great. So my question is to these guidelines, who is going to use it? I mean, in fact, because we are among us, we understand and we support this. But is it prepared for the Commission or to the European Parliament or to national governments? So how you see, I mean, maybe this is not the question to you, but maybe if the MPs would be here, maybe that would be much better to have a discussion. And also, I'm really glad that Mr. Schmidt is also here from the Commission. So how is taken these guidelines? If maybe Mr. Schmidt could answer this, or you ladies who you presented. So how you see the impact and the effectiveness of these guidelines in the reality? Because my experience that they are useless in terms of, influencing the main policy and also implementation of EU funds. Thank you.
Thank you. I will rather take 2 or 3 questions, and after the panelists can answer. Other questions?
I have also one question on the...
Can you
Speak to microphone.
I can speak?
to my
You can hear me? I have one suggestion and one question.
Please.
Ме имам гати че Романо много хала. Те представиме първо. Моро алапси Ивица Петрович, MBA, живан де Австрия, 33 мреж. Radivin Čate, inače sem jek bachtalorом, poslovno Rom, inače sam inženjer isto, mangamo reprimerujate penav, ke Rom, šaj ostvarin, korkoro isto bud. Amen, Roma, postani srdam, bud zavisno katare gađe. Amen, morate penas, istina. Sasi šukarka tega ja, kaj lasa stankura, a ne kaj ja kanči najsem zadovoljno. Ipak mesem jak intelektualno Rom, na klem bud potem, čera bučisva konea, naj samo biznis, nego i politički, inače sem i predsjedniko od komunističke partije SBJ, haj član centralnog komiteta, haj sesma bah, te barov, ande jek država se jak hardeli Jugoslavija, haj si čilem, sosi demokratija. Me bešav antumaro čerkate, ande Evropsko unija, o parlamento, me izvinima, te uvrediva tu men, a me nima gav te uvrediv kanika. Me mangav samo te motav godoaso, me doživi sardem, man jesija je pinda te štar breš. Ali sa sočerda Evropsku unije romenđe, kanči najgoda. A men žisam da Evropa, jek milja breš, a men sam do španč milijonu rađene, katege ja samo ande Evropa, dičen, ande zanje tranda breš šar žine Roma, beda, neznanje, zavisnost. Aj tu men manđente čerente pnena menđe, sar tu men čerena menđe nešto la čipe. Šajhu haven len, al but amen, na štihu haven. Aj me mangav te pnav goda, kaj on daran saore te pnen goda. Kaj daran, kaj stop.
Can you put the question?
No, please, I have right to say in a name for many millions people, what people think, but nobody had this courage to say. And today, I have this right to say. And I have the question after this. I ja hoću da, me mangate čerav dalje svato Romane. Ja vas molim, ja sam se zahvalio, me zahvali salem prvo Evropske unijače, kaj manđente pomožu nam men, kaj čere nešto, ali goda naj efekto. Temo taptu minđe. Sima jek baro pitanje. Molima tu minđe, tja šudenkava pitanje, lače. Se Roma, se dobisarde, se je žinan de Evropa. Pučem pe jek. Haj maj bitno. Evropsku unija penel. Kaj dija milijarde romenđan za nje biš tranda breš. Milijarde te žin maj lače. Za školsko obrazovanje. Šaj tu menmo to namenđe. Kaj si go je pare? Sočer di logo do reparenca. Sar sao uspeho si tu men go do reparenca. Stop, kalakaj čeren čeraj romenđe. Kuda ni interesuil man. Interesuil amen. Amen interesuil te erom korkoro sičon. Te bidžanena, te zaradin omarno, o znanje. Kaj šaj amen, saure Roma.
The translation is not working and people don't understand what you're saying.
Bite?
The translation is not working and people don't understand.
Yes, he speak, you speak, I don't understand nothing. Repeat.
The translation is not working and people don't understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Can you put the question, please?
I can. Doesn't matter. The Roma understand, I think. Well,
No, I'm sorry, you have
is this question okay if Roma people or not?
Sorry, we are in an organized environment. If I
Avasi
may.
organization, allow me
Yes,
to put
and you
this
have
last
to
question,
respect-
please.
Okay, please put
Okay,
it.
put the
Very
question,
short.
please.
Hello? When you don't like, and these Europeans don't like meine question, we are not in democracy.
Then put the question.
Yes, when you need translate, I speak 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, you told me your translator not function. Typisch democracy.
I am sorry. If you want, you can make a formal complaint, but
Okay,
you have to
please
go on.
tell me, where is No. Romano. No, foarte mal. Si ma pravate včera v Romano svato kategija. Temo to namenje, draga Evropska unija, haj godola, se si zaduženo godolese. An zanje tranda breš, kaj dienga bor pare, kodo bi sarda godova pare, haj dal si tu men kontrola socer di logo do reparenza. Tu men penen corcoro nai corrupția, a men controli. Stop. What you Janeso, das ist gut. Again a translator. I think you don't like my question. Das ist das old.
Okay, I can translate.
Yo, please translate. I cannot believe only when I speak very important questions, nobody can translate. I cannot believe that.
Okay, the question is that he's asking European Union if we can tell him where the millions which target Roma went. If there is in place a checking mechanism for what is happening with those money.
Preveri, translate please. I kako možemo mi crno na belo da pogledamo ko je dobio te pare? Și am indicat, pardon, pocalo kodo bi se da pare. Hajde da nas gači, makar anzalizanje deš breš. A ne mangaste kontrološi gači dve pare.
He wants that somebody checks what happened with the money used for Roma in the last 10 years. Very short. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Please.
Thank you very much. Also, I have another question. It's a question for the researchers regarding the EU funds. Can I put the question, sir?
Can we give the opportunity also to other people from the room to...
I'm kindly asking you, and Romani's translation, please. So, I'm kindly asking all of you to respect each other.
Inclusive you.
You to respect them, and kindly asking the others to respect you. We are all here equals. Doesn't matter if you come from Germany or Romania, if you are Sinti, Manush.
Thank you, Marius. Please.
Okay, this is a question for the researchers regarding the usage of the EU funds by the grassroots NGOs, by Roma grassroots NGOs. Did you consider in your methodology also to evaluate as a solution to identify the needs of the Roma communities through a method which usually is called Beneficiary Participatory Assessment? And if you use that, which are the results from now it's working. From the perspective, which is the level used by the donors, this kind of participatory approach, which gives you the opportunity to identify the real needs of the Roma communities and the Roma NGOs, and at the same time, if there are best practices by donors in using this kind of method. Why I'm putting this question? Because I know it's a new thing, and also, I know how difficult and complex is this method. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will invite the panelists to answer to the questions.
Thank you. I can start regarding the guide, the question that was asked. This event is actually the event where we are launching for the first time the guide. Although it has been elaborated at the end of last year, we wanted to use the opportunity to launch it for the Roma Week event, and also because we wanted to have the print version. So there hasn't been any time to have a feedback of how exactly it works, how civil society think about it, and how efficient really is. So, but obviously what we can say is that this is a work in progress type of document. And so to the extent the feedback that we are going to receive, it's going to push us to make some changes, we would be happy, I guess, to do it. Romeo Franz, I'm sure that was his sole purpose, to make this tool a very user-friendly tool for everybody. And if I can just apologize on behalf of Ergo, because we are the main organizer of this event, for what has just happened, for what you have just witnessed. That's not how we want to conduct ourselves nor our meetings. Also apologize to the representative of the European Commission, and to say that from our perspective, having also assessed the European framework that has been launched by the European Commission in 2020, this is one of the most advanced policy documents that we have ever witnessed at the level of the EU, which focuses on a sole minority, which is the Roma community. And so it's more, when we talk, just to also answer the question that the person is not here for, to answer the question, is not so much what the EU is doing, because the EU is doing a lot, but more so what the member states are doing, and the failure for them to actually implement the EU level policies, where we are a little bit stuck. And so unfortunately, we don't have so many member states present here, but that's a message that we would like to get across, that this is where we are expecting more follow-up on the implementation level. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabella. Marco?
Yeah, just quickly to answer the gentleman's question, I think this is what everyone really wants to know. This is one of the questions that I asked donors in the interviews, and most of the answers is we don't know. And it's exactly because of this, is the responsibility is not at the donor level, and especially with the EU and European Commission, and also intergovernmental organizations who do development work. They have agreements with countries, with member states. It is their responsibility and their ability to monitor where the funding and how the funding is used. So when I asked this question, almost all donors said, we don't know and we can't track it. So that is the short answer to his question. And then to answer your question, yes, about like any sort of participatory process, whether it's participatory budgeting or so on. Only a small amount of this is being used, and I would suggest to read the report, because in there's good practices, both from community-led local development initiatives that Ergo was a part of, and then also the European Commission supported, and also like some other best practices from the Council of Europe on this topic. And those are the best practices because, yes, then those needs are defined. There's relationships that are built with the local municipalities as well, because then they're co-developed. And they're quite sustainable as well, and a lot of more kind of targeted funding that really impacts people is used. So that's it.
Thank you. Because we are over time, I will invite the last panel to join the discussion, and Belen, who will moderate together with Michal, Guillermo, Elisabetta, Patricia, and Mr. Sabolt.
Sitting at the rosters, I go here.
He's bleeding. Oh yeah, that's right. Should we tell him?
Mr. Schmidt,
I think you're
bleeding.
Yeah.
You're bleeding
Or is
over
this a small thing? It's like a skin thing, yeah.
Is it still?
It's there. Very small. I don't have.
About it?
You want this? Are you okay? Yeah. Okay. So good afternoon. Welcome to the last panel on monitoring the effectiveness of national and EU funds for Roma under the national Roma strategic frameworks, the case of the Roma Civil Monitoring Project. I'm delighted to be here with these colleagues to talk about the importance of monitoring the implementation of the national strategies. I am Belén Sánchez Rubio from the Fundación Secretariado Gitano, a Spanish NGO, and also I'm a member of the Roma Civil Monitoring Project consortium that is also composed by CIU, ERGO, and the European Roma Rights Center. The aim of the project is to strengthen the capacity of Roma civil society to become key advocacy actors, and a key aspect of such work has started with the assessment of the national Roma strategies, name it like that, and particularly the focus on the allocation of sufficient and quality funding for the implementation of these strategies, because the allocation of funding certainly is a key question, as it has been acknowledged during the session. I think, as Isabella was mentioning, I believe we are now in the situation where we have the best ever EU instruments for Roma equality and inclusion. We have, on the one hand, the European Roma strategic framework that, as Isabella was saying, it's a milestone, certainly an advance from previous framework. And we also have the approval of the EU funds regulations, namely the ESF Plus and the ERDF, which are of special relevance for Roma, and the future imminent approval of the programs at the national and regional level. It is true that in the past programming period, the great potential of the funds was somehow underused at national and also at regional level. Roma were not reflected enough in these programs, and we had witnessed very short-term, small-scale and isolated actions that had very little impact. There's been a lot of obstacles in the management as well of these funds, and we believe we now have the opportunity to overcome these barriers. When we talk about effectiveness in the implementation of funds, we are certainly talking about the need for alignment, the alignment between the funding allocation and the establishment of policy priorities. And this means that investments on Roma must be focused and must be based on participatory needs assessment, and to assure the coherence between this assessment and the measures to be implemented with enough and quality funding. That's the only way, by being ambitious in this regard and have a medium and long-term perspective, is the only way we can actually make a difference in the life of people, in the life of Roma. And the key question for the effective implementation of funds certainly relates in the quality of monitoring, and particularly of that carried out by the NGOs, by Roma civil society. But monitoring needs to be facilitated and needs to be understood as a factor that clearly adds a value to the impact of investments by providing on-the-ground vision and an alternative perspective that is clearly complementary to the ones that public authorities may have. The project Roma Civil Monitoring works to increase this capacity of Roma civil society, as I was mentioning, in 26 member states. And these capacities has the aim of supporting these NGOs to perform this monitoring task, this very important task. So in this panel, we have three representatives from Roma Civil Monitoring coordinators that are part of this project, from Germany, from Poland, and from the Czech Republic. And we also have a video from a National Roma Contact Point, so a public authority in charge of the National Strategy for Roma. We have a video from Spain, from Patricia Bezunartea, from the head of the National Roma Contact Point. And we also have the pleasure to have here a representative from the European Commission who is also in charge and is responsible of the overall management of the Roma Civil Monitoring Project. So I will just immediately give the floor to our first speaker, Michal Miko, from the RomanoNet, an umbrella organization from the Czech Republic. And as I said, he is the Roma Civil Monitoring Coordinator of that country. I have 3 questions I would like you to answer and to share with the public, with the audience here. The first question is a general one for the 3 of you, the 3 NGOs here. What is your overall assessment of the quality of respective national policy frameworks, national strategies on Roma, but in relation to the foreseen allocation of sufficient or adequate funding at national, regional, or even local funds? We know this assessment is on paper because the strategies are not being implemented yet. So this view of this general aspect. And to Michal, I would specifically want to ask you if you believe there's been any progress in this moment in relation to the process of funding allocation in relation to the previous programming period, and very particularly, in your opinion, what are the main challenges and capacities of Roma NGOs to engage in the process of monitoring and implementing EU cohesion funds, in particularly of the ESF+? And to what extent or how should the ESF Plus capacity building for Roma civil society be focused in order to be meaningful and to have a real impact? So if you can provide some examples too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. Thank you, Belen, for the introduction. Let me start by giving you some background information related to the first question which was given to me. I mean, the advocacy of the NGO sector or of the civil society in the Czech Republic, it's a continual work. It didn't start only with the RCM project as itself, but we started already in 2019 at the end of the 2019, and then during the pandemic of COVID, we were in the touch with the governmental office and preparing the strategy for the Roma inclusion. And in our case, I will reflect the situation in the Czech Republic. So the strategy as itself, as the document, it was prepared by the Governmental Office for Roma Minority Affairs, but we didn't like the concept which was presented to us, and also how we reconsidered that the measures which were proposed by the government are very weak and not in the cohesion with the recommendations of the European Council. So the specific recommendations of the European Council were not taken by the government into the consideration. So we just changed the trajectory of our work and we focus on the cooperation with the DG Employment. So I want to take from that floor to the employees of the DG Employment, especially to Pavel Tichtl, who help us to push the government to adopt the specific recommendations of the European Council and implement them within the strategy, because that's the important step for the future of the Roma inclusion in the Czech Republic. Without that, we will be again witnessing the same situation since 2004, that there are investments but no measures or no measuring of the impact on Roma. What is very important, if we want to know how many people we did help within the implementation of the European Social Investments Fund, then we need to know to whom we helped and to how many people we helped. That we can calculate that this amount of money helped to those people, to get to the better education or to the better housing or to the better work. But this was not happening since 2004, and it also bringing me to the point of the capacity building, which is very important. We are witnessing since 2004 only the manipulation with the civil society sector in the national context. That there are a few like calls for proposals for the capacity building, and mostly they are given to the biggest Czech NGOs who are taking the Roma only as puppets with whom they can play, that they are supporting the development of the NGO sector within the national context. And also I would like to point out what was presented by Marko Pecák here with the research which was done with the project of European Roma Grassroots Network and Daniel Grebel-Linger and his organization. I mean, the investments to the Roma inclusion as itself, it's a plenty of money which are spent, but no one knows what is the impact. And no one knows how much money were spent. So it brings me also that the allocations which we agreed with to have for the next period of the European Social Investments Fund within the Czech Republic, it's a big amount of money. But at the same time, we agreed with the institutions, to have as well the representation of the Roma within the monitoring committees of the operational programs, and also to have a representatives in the managing authorities, because that's important step to have. There is not only that the governmental office of the Czech Republic is somehow the leading actor in the Roma inclusion, but we also need to have a Roma people or people who understand to the Roma inclusion within the structure of the managing authorities, because they are important. They are key actors in the implementation of the operational programs. And for that reason, I mean, I want to say as well that I get lost a little bit. Yeah, key actors who can influence the trajectory of the implementation of the European Social Investments Fund within the national context. And the third question was?
No, it was on the capacity, the challenges for NGOs.
Yeah. The challenges for the capacity building, I mean, it's very hard when it comes to the capacity building, because there is no systematic development of the capacity building. The Roma civil society since FARE program in Czech Republic were put it into the side, and most of them were fighting, to get to their positions where they are now, alone, without any support, and fighting without the support of the government. Mostly there are in Czech Republic the two streams within the implementation of the strategies. We have two strategies, like one is for the social inclusion and second one is for the Roma integration. And these two strategies, when they are on the one railway and when the rails are coming together, they are mixing, and there are clashes between the departments of the state. That they are arguing who will do that and who will do that. But this is not helping to the people. And when it comes to the capacity building, there were never published the open call for the for the capacity building of the Roma organizations. Mostly it's general, and it's not following the development of the NGO, of the Roma civil society as itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal, for stressing the importance of having strong NGOs acting as to improve the investment on Roma, because we have a decade ahead of us, and such an influence would be very meaningful. So thank you and for sharing. Now I will give the turn to Guillermo Ruiz from the Central Council for German Sinti and Roma, and he's also the Roma Civil Monitoring Coordinator for Germany. So Guillermo, again, the first question on what is your overall assessment of the national strategy in Germany? If you believe there's been any progress in relation to the allocation of funds to the implementation of the strategy in comparison to the previous period. And a particular question to you, how are the conditions for the NGO in Germany to access and implement EU cohesion funds, in particularly ESF and FEAD? I think it's you also are knowledgeable about. And what do you believe are the main obstacles and limitations to that end? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. The first question is quite easy to answer, because in Germany there is no strategy. The German government has submitted again a list of programs and measures that already exist that somehow address or target disadvantaged Sinti and Roma communities in Germany. But there is a change, there is a promise that this might change. National contact point will be set up in the Ministry for Family and Social Affairs. It might happen this year already, and it seems to be that there will be in the future a strategy. How these national focal points will look like, we don't know. How many people will work in these focal points? Maybe 3 employees will have it. We suppose that they will, in the next years, develop somehow a kind of strategy, and what we are demanding for years is the setting up a commission for the national level, in national, regional, and local level. And we expect and we hoped that will happen. And with regard to that allocation of funds, there is no allocation, no strategic allocation of funding at the regional and local level. Funding is given to NGOs that apply for funding. That means if there is a need to support disadvantaged communities, if there is no applicant organization, no project will be carried out. It might be that there is an urgent need to implement measures, for example, for fostering integration into the labor markets of young people, but no project will be implemented if there is no organization that applies for the funding. As Central Council of German Sinti and Roma, we don't demand that EU projects, EU funds, or European social funds projects are implemented targeting Sinti and Roma. We do believe all citizens, especially disadvantaged citizens, should benefit from these projects. But we demand that disadvantaged Sinti and Roma should have the equal access to these programs. There are 2 funds that are relevant for disadvantaged communities in Germany, the European Social Funds and the European Fund for the Most Deprived, FEAD. Especially in the framework of FEAD, there is a large amount of projects targeting citizens from Southeastern Europe, and many of these citizens are disadvantaged Roma. There are almost no projects targeting German Sinti and Roma. FEAD focuses much more explicitly on newcomers from EU member states living in precariousness. The nominal approach of the projects is that a kind of bridging logic. That means they aim to provide referrals to mainstream social services. This happens partly through counseling centers and cafes, and partly through outreach and work on the streets. There is no organization of Sinti and Roma running a European Social Fund project. There is just one Roma organization in Berlin running a FEAD project. This is due to the fact that the technical requirements for running an ESF or FEAD project are very high. We have asked several times the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs to change the situation and to provide capacity building for organizations of Sinti and Roma. The answer has been always the same, that self-organizations should join most capable organizations to be able to run the projects. But we find it very complicated, because I think self-organizations of Sinti and Roma, and migrant organizations as well, should get training to be able to develop themselves the projects if they want to do it. Another problem we observe with the implementation of the EU funds is they do often not fit the needs of the target communities. So European social funds support measures often target participants with higher formal qualifications. That means there is a shortage of low threshold support measures. For example, through the FEAD program, it's not possible to implement vocational training supporting young people to insert into the labor markets. It happens through European Social Fund projects, and many times the participants don't meet the requirements to take part in these projects and programs. At the moment, we have a problem because there is a gap of 1.5 years between the previous and next funding periods of FEAD, That means most of the implementing organizations have been forced to stop the projects. In Berlin, around 60%, for example. On this really did face a real problem for organizations implementing this fair project, but as well for the clients, for their target groups. No? With regard to the problems, there is one organization, there is the Hildering Lagrange Foundation, which is member of the monitoring committees of FAIRs, but there is no representative of Sinti and Roma in the advisory board of European Social Funds, or there is as well no migrant organization in the advisory board of European Social Funds. Another problem we have in the framework of the implementation of EU funds is that Roma faced racism, anti-Gypsyism by employees of organizations implementing safe and fair projects. Trainings on anti-Gypsyism are provided in the framework of the FAIR program, but these trainings are on voluntary basis. The Central Council will demand that trainings on anti-Gypsyism should be obligation for organizations that implement European social funds or FAIR projects targeting disadvantaged Sinti and Roma. This is what I can say at the moment.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. I think you pointed out aspects that are also common, I think, to the Czech Republic, and we'll see most probably to Poland and other countries, but ideas that we believe are very important is the importance of having solid and capable national Roma contact points, and where they are located within the governance structure makes a lot of difference. The limiting access for Roma NGOs to the funds, but also that the funds actually reach out for Sinti and Roma in your case, that they are not included within the concept of vulnerable groups. So at the end of the day, and this is actually curious because, you know, the ESF Plus allows for, specifically has a specific objective on Roma. So we have the political message clearly coming from the EU, but then when it comes to the national level, it seems that these messages get diluted somehow. And this is very important. Also that the importance of being in the monitoring committees, and you were also mentioning this, or the advisory boards that actually have a say on the design of policies and the assignment of funding to that end. So I think you pointed out very, very important points. I will now give the floor to Elisabeta, I never know how to say it, Elżbieta, sorry, Mirga Wojtowicz, sorry about that, from the Art Foundation, Joe Dick, Roma Civil Monitoring Coordinator for Poland. So, Ella, you also have this general question on the overall assessment, and if there's any progress in relation to the allocation of funding. And then I have two specific questions to you. If there's any planned combination or connection of different types of funding at the national level or regional level to assure the implementation of the thematic priorities such as education and housing, which seem to be some of the priorities of the Polish national strategy. And in your opinion, what are the main challenges again and capacities of Roma NGOs to engage in the process of monitoring or implementing EU funds? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. So I will start with introducing a little bit of the program, and I would like to say that we in Poland, I could say that we are in better position because we have the new governmental program for social and civic integration of the Roma community. That is the name of the program. 2021-2030 is a continuation of the earlier programs, which were started in 2001. So, and the new program was adopted in December 2020, so by the Council of Ministers. So there was no interruption in the continuation of activities and tasks. This is something to be underlined here. The important thing is that there is a political will and consistency in the allocation of financial resources. The important findings from the preliminary analysis of the new Roma program are the following. So the form of the program and the mode of application have no change in principle. As you said, the government program prioritize education issues because it is believed that all issues Roma are facing, including discrimination, are results of lack of education. They believe that education will provide way or avenue for social and economic integration of Roma into majority is at best necessary condition for integration. In the area of education, the program underlines the following elements, like Roma assistant program, Roma education assistance, scholarship systems, reform of the psychopedagogical commissions, which child should be following special education, for example, reform of state subsidy for minority children, which are in hands of local authorities. Housing, which is another specific area, and it is seen as a urgent and requiring state intervention only in the places where live marginalized communities situated mainly in the southern regions of Poland, and partly employment are considered important in Polish context. However, neither in area of education nor housing or employment the potential negative impact of anti-Gypsies is considered. What is very important and alarming, I think, the notion of anti-Gypsies is not even mentioned in the whole text of the strategy of the program. It is believed that the whole program has anti-discriminatorian character, therefore horizontally it deals with the issues. The program stressed the Roma organization themselves do not highly appreciate it. Very few projects targeting discrimination were proposed in the previous program. There is no reference where listed quoting such opinions. The stance in contrast with the EU Council recommendation, seeing anti-Gypsyism as a root cause of many ills in integrating Roma in Europe. The weakness of the Polish program lies with the way it seeks explaining Roma marginalization as a result of Roma culture. I'm quoting practices, as a Roma culture practices. The program says, I'm quoting, it must be acknowledged that the perpetuating role of the cultural element in this group, which limits the scope of education, remains underestimated in national integration strategies, including the Polish one, as evidenced by the fiasco of certain integration measures conducted both in Poland and in other European countries. So guilty are therefore Roma themselves for their culture, which restricts the scope of education. The question about has there been any progress in relation to funding allocation from previous program and period? So, as I said, the program is funded by the state budget since the beginning. The current program is also secured by the funds from the state budget. This should be emphasized, and that the Polish government is really, they said and they do what they said. However, the amount allocated to the program has remained unchanged for many years. It is 10 million zloty by year, so it's 2.4 million of euro for project implemented through the whole country. The same amount of money is planned to the new program for the years 2021, 2030. So we spoke with many leaders and activists, representatives of the organization, and discussed with them this issue, and they all agree that funding should be increased. because it has remained, as I said, at the same level for many years. So I should say that there is no progress in relation to the funding allocation from previous programming period. And the question about planet combination connection of different types of fundings. So the funds allocated, as I said, in the Roma program are from state budget. The ESF Plus is mentioned in the Polish Roma program according to the Roma program document. ESF Plus resources will be complementary to the activities of the integration program with regard to education, active participation, promotion of equal opportunities, socio-economical and professional activation of people excluded at risk of exclusion, including Roma. But at the moment, there are created at the level of provincial, they were at the state level, but now there are created programs through which it will be possible to benefit from EU. They are at the regional level. And we still are waiting for the concrete documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to see that not everything is negative, so there's some positive air I understand, in the new strategy in Poland. It is true indeed that it's very worrying that if a policy document does the analysis of the causes of marginalization is wrong or is biased, so to speak, I think this will determine the type of measures that will be implemented, because it's based on the analysis of what causes the inequality. So I understand this is a really an important gap or problem of the Polish strategy. We would like to see the ERDF more mentioned in the allocation of funds for the implementation of strategies. ERDF, so it is not only ESF Plus that has to deal with Roma issues. Funds such as the ERDF can play a crucial role in housing, in digital competences and equipment, connectivity, etc. So there's a whole world in the ERDF that should be explored for allocating funds for the priorities of the strategies. Before I move to the video, I would just forgot to say that, just in case the translation has changed, 26 is for Romani language, 16 is for Hungarian, and 2 is for English. Yeah, I hope it's working now? He left? Okay, then nothing. Okay. Now we'll present the video from the Spanish National Roma Contact Point, Patricia Bezun Artea. She's the head of the National Roma Contact Point, and she's the General Director for Family Diversity and Social Services. And we asked her to tell us to what extent there's been also some improvement in the process of aligning the national strategies with the allocation of funds in Spain. And this is her answer. She's in the video. She apologizes for not being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to these events on EU funds for Roma, and particularly to speak in this second panel on monitoring the effectiveness of national and EU funds for Roma under the national Roma strategic frameworks. I'm sorry I can't be there physically, but I have another important event I can't miss today, and it also deals with policies related to Roma here in Spain. As we'll here know, we have ahead of us a remaining challenge that we member states have not been able to fully tackle for years: the persistent inequality, social exclusion, and discrimination of the Roma community across Europe. And it is essential to invest well on what we know that actually contributes to guarantee access to social and economic rights, accessing on an equal basis to at least compulsory education, salaried jobs, health, decent housing, equal treatment, in sum, to guarantee the fundamental rights for Roma. Spain adopted its National Strategic Framework for Roma Equality, Inclusion and Participation, our national strategy on Roma, in 2021, following the EU requirements. This new strategy clearly builds on a comprehensive assessment of Roma needs and on the previous failures, gaps, and positive aspects for the former national strategy. I have to say that this analytical process has been a participatory process where Roma civil society organizations have been very actively involved from the beginning to the end. This process has been channeled formally through the Spanish National Council of Roma People, where Roma civil society organizations and representatives of different public authorities gather to deal with issues that affect Roma people in our country. Civil society organizations' input has been essential and has been considered in the adopted strategy. And one of the key novelties regarding the new national strategy has to do with the process for assuring the allocation of sufficient funds for the implementation of the strategy, both at national and regional level. This is certainly a crucial question that was missing and that affects the correct development of the priorities established in the strategy, that the funding needs to be planned. To that end, we have carried out some time now negotiation processes to assure that the strategy counts with sufficient and quality funding. For instance, we as National Roma Contact Point have been and still are in conversations with national ESF Plus and ERDF managing authorities to become direct beneficiaries of ESF Plus funds in the new programming period in order to develop common and transversal measures of the strategy, such as research for gathering data, monitoring the strategy, sensitizing campaigns, evaluation, develop participatory processes, networking, piloting, etc. We are also committed to increasing national funds to reinforce the national strategy and its implementation at regional level. Those funds are this year more than double than 2 years ago. As regards mainstream policies inclusive with Roma, we have been and still are in close coordination with other key ministries to define their needs in relation to Roma and to design mainstream policies and reforms that consider particular needs of Roma. While EU funds are essential to implement the national Roma strategic frameworks, we understand that they are not the only funding source for it. However, it has certain elements that make the EU financial instruments absolutely useful to counter structural inequalities of Roma in our countries. EU funding allows for long-term investments that are so much needed, as well as for large-scale programs, among other positive aspects. We need to use them at their full potential. Thank you very much for your attention, for your invitation, and I wish you a fruitful Roma week.
Okay, thank you to Patricia for sending this and for stressing how funding needs to be planned. I think this is a summary of actually what we wanted to discuss here, that funding and the allocation and the alignment of funding doesn't happen by chance, but it actually a work in itself to make sure, and this is a clear responsibility of the National Roma Contact Points, to make sure that there's enough and quality funding for the implementation of the policy priorities. I will now give the floor to Slavoj Schmidt, head of the unit of the Non-Discrimination and Roma Coordination of the Director General for Justice and Consumers of the European Commission, and he will be focusing on the importance of independent monitoring and data collection and evaluation, but also we'll be able to react to what has been said in the panel. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Belen. Indeed, I was carefully listening for the past 2.5 hours to all the debates. And first of all, many thanks to Ergo for having invited the Commission to this event. This event is not organized by the Commission, unlike others. We had also our own events within the framework of the Roma Week. There was the wonderful one on the Romani language a few days ago, and there will be another one tomorrow. But here we are guests, and I'm really very pleased that I had also the opportunity to hear, so to say, from first hand, from Elżbieta, from Patricia, from Michal, and from Guillermo, how you see the programming done in your respective member states. I I would like to reflect also on a few things that were brought up in the previous panels. I think the whole discussion started with saying that we need legislation, we need funds if we want to advance with equality and inclusion of Roma. I think when it comes to law, what we see is that there is a law, and it has a name, it has a number. The number is 2000/43, which shows that it's a very old law, 20 years old, and it prohibits any sort of discrimination on the basis of ethnicity in the area of schooling, in the area of access to goods and services, including housing, in the area of health protection, in the area of employment. So there is a strong legislation in place which helps a lot. And we have plenty of cases that are grace to this legislation prevented, but we also see that discrimination is still widespread. Far too widespread, especially when it comes to Roma, and that's why what we see is not so much the need for new legislation of that type, but for new legislation that strengthens the actual implementation of the legislation that we have. And that is exactly what the Commission is doing. So as also MEP Franz was calling for, a new legislation is in the pipeline. It will be presented to the House and of course also to the Member States later on this year, and it will be focusing on the strengthening of the equality bodies so that everyone who is subject to discrimination on whatever of the protected grounds will benefit in future from better protection. When it comes to funds, we see that funds have been made available already as a result of the preceding EU strategy on Roma inclusion. Namely, from 2014 to 2021, we had already a dedicated allocation for Roma inclusion measures. But what we also see that they didn't function well. Actually, a lot of the funds that were allocated were not even used and had to be returned for other purposes. And that is, so to say, the starting point for us when we started to look into the previous strategy, and I think a lot of dissatisfaction was expressed with what has been achieved so far. I can only confirm that. We see only very little areas where we have some improvement, but even there, and education is one of that, we see improvement, for instance, in the education attainment, but at the same time we see deepening segregation. So can we speak about a success? I don't think so, if we have segregation. But the problem was that segregation and discrimination was not at all addressed at that time. By the way, I heard a lot of frustration today in this room. And there was also a question, is the Commission at all following with a dedicated team the case of Roma exclusion? And I can firmly tell you, yes, it is. We do have a tiny little team consisting only of 5 people. It's not a lot, but these are 5 dedicated, committed colleagues. Many of them are actually here in the room. The team leader, Dan Dogi, is here over there, accompanied by the colleagues Marcela Adamova, by Lavinia Banu. Even when the translation didn't function, everything what was said in Romanes was well understood and heard by the Commission. So I can reassure you that we are working in that in a partially more better staffed manner than some of the member states, as we just heard. So I think this is also important to have as a background. But now coming to the new framework, I think it is extremely important to see that the Commission came up with a whole package of measures. So we did not simply come up with the next new framework, but we proposed also to the member states that you should self-commit yourself through a recommendation to concrete measures. And I can So there's the recommendation, we have a list of indicators, how you can measure that, and we have a full-fledged analytical document. Now, when it comes to this recommendation that was adopted by the member states in full unanimity, there is a dedicated recommendation on funding. I don't want to take too much of your time, but it says member states, that's what member states tell to themselves, should make full and optimal use of mainstream and targeted union and national funds relevant for preventing and combating discrimination of Roma. So it is there, black and white, and that is a self-commitment of each and every member state of the European Union. Now, when it comes to funding, I think here we all have to work very strongly together, each on her and his end. The European Commission was very much insisting that the programming of the funds is aligned, as you said, Belen, to the actual national strategies. So we were really insisting that one follows the other and that these things are not done independently. We were also very strongly insisting that there is an institutional exchange. Whenever we got the impression that the national Roma contact points were not properly consulted, whenever we had the impression that the allocations, the attentions in the structural funds are not properly foreseen for Roma, we flagged it at our side. This has been done, and you probably all know there are these so-called partnership agreements, which are partially still under negotiation, and I can tell you this is one of the tricky issues, because the Commission was not always satisfied with what was presented. In some member states, we even saw a decrease of funds for Roma compared to the previous period, and we were not ready to accept it, and we are still in a discussion with the member states. So this is what we do on our side. But of course, we rely also very much on civil society organizations. And we do not only rely, and again, the recommendation also self-obliges every member state to keep civil society organizations closely involved in the design, in the monitoring of the implementation, but we also strengthen the civil society organization. And actually, the representatives of this project are also one of the result of a project which has been initiated quite a time ago by the European Parliament as a so-called pilot project, and which is now continued, and where we really believe that we have to build the structures in the member states which can closely follow much better than the Commission from a central place what is happening in the individual member states. Thirdly, and again, many thanks to the European Parliament that we got the legal possibility to have this cascading grants. This is also a new possibility, and as you all probably know, ERGO, the European Grassroots organizations who organized today's event, is one of our framework partners. So we have a long-term cooperation where we are providing also financial support to the operational activities of ERGO, and as such, you are also qualified to cascade further down to your national organizations. And there was a question on how scientific this is all done from the Commission side. I would say it's our main concern is that these monies are used for the purposes as foreseen and that they are in safe hands. And otherwise, I think there's a lot of flexibility as long as the purpose pre-designed by the European Parliament is respected. So I think from 23 onwards, there's a wonderful possibility, and I'm really happy to see that you have already started to work on the principle how these funds can then really effectively disperse, because we think that has then also a very positive impact on the monitoring, on the actual use of the structural funds, because that is also a novum which we introduced with the new structural funds regulation, that unlike in the past, it is not a one-off that There must be a strategy in place, but we have foreseen that there's an ongoing monitoring involvement of civil society organizations. So you are expected to stay on board throughout the whole 7 years until this money is dispersed, and we don't want to see again situations that calls are not published for 2-3 years, and then the time is too short, and then the money is reallocated. I think with that I covered almost all. There was one question on the guidelines. I'm perhaps not the right person to respond to this question from first hand, but what I can tell you, these guidelines are more internal for the Commission. For us, it is important that what we apply to one member state as a criteria is then applied to all the member states. And this is the way how these guidelines are used by the colleagues in DG Regio and in DG Ample to make sure that in the negotiation with the member states on the operational programs, on their implementation, on the monitoring, we apply always the same stringent criteria. I know that there is no guarantee that I can give you, but I think we have set a lot of preconditions that this coming strategic framework will be more successful than the previous one, because I really believe that Europe can simply not afford to continue with this extremely shameful situation that the largest ethnic minority is discriminated and excluded and marginalized and not participating in all these processes. So I hope that with that I could also respond to all the questions that were posed to me, and I would like to thank for your attention.
Thank you very much, Slavoj Smith, for again showing, I think, the EC commitment to Roma equality. I think we will all agree that it's honest and the documents are there. And I truly believe that, as you said, the segregation, anti-discrimination are something that is being pushed by the Commission toward, because it's not in the political agenda of many member states. So we really appreciate that the Commission actually takes a leading role in making sure that whatever is on paper, because one thing is to be on paper and the other one is in practice, as you said, as regards discrimination and as regards many other things, that we really need to, together, civil society and the Commission need to keep an eye, very close eye, and monitor, have the capacities to monitor properly, both of us, on the implementation at national level, because as you heard today, the stories at national level are somehow very far from what the papers actually say. So I really appreciate, thank you.
Just on that, also to reassure you, of course, the Commission, our office will also continue to monitor, and the first visible step will be in autumn a report which assesses all these national strategies, and we will make a lot of use of all the input that we heard now and that we will be getting from the civil society monitoring, and of course we have then also all the other aspects, and that can then be discussed also in this wider fora later on in this year. Thank you.
I was told that Marek Hoxik wanted to be there, but I don't know if he's connected anymore. No? Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much to all the panelists and to you. If there's any questions from the audience, you have now the opportunity to do so. Just 2 minutes we have, so if there's any... Okay, I think since we are running late, I think we will just give the floor for the conclusions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Instead of conclusion, as there is no more time left, and also because the MEP that was supposed to do also initially conclusion also has to go voting, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank all those that contributed to the organizing of this event. Ergo was not the only one as the main organizers. We did this together with the FSG, the Fundación Secretariado Gitano, the CU Central European University, under the Roma Civil Monitoring, but also with our partners
at the grassroots level, such as the Paru Dimos Foundation, Roma Association, and also, if I'm not mistaken, now the partners in Slovakia, right? Center for Research and Advocacy, I think they're called. And so and the Office of Roma France, of course. So thank you so much for staying here until the end. And so we just gonna to allow you to continue with this amazing award that is coming next. Thank you so much. And let's thank everyone that has spoken. Thank you.